about you, God knows. Your habits and your plans and your desires and your attitudes and your actions, God knows them all. Nothing catches God by surprise. God even knows the numbers of the hair on your head. He knows you that well. And He also created you just the way that you are. Your height, your smile, your dimple, the color of your eyes. And He used all of those gifts to set you apart from anyone else for a reason. When everything else around us is not making sense, and you're looking for meaning and purpose in life, wherever you're at in your faith journey, knowing that God knew you and formed you and set you apart can give you the grounding that you desperately need in order to go on. God made you that way. And there's a reason for that. Before you were born, God dreamed about you. And what you would be, and what you would look like, and where you would go in your life's journey. When I was a senior in high school, and believe it or not, I can remember this very clearly, even though it was when I was about 18 years old, so it was one of the bullet points in my life. But I remember I was a senior in high school, and I was kind of cruising by. I had all my core classes finished. I knew where I was going to college, and I just had to pick up a couple of elective classes in order to graduate. So I found out that my two best friends were taking this drafting class. And so first of all, I signed up for the class because my two best friends were in there, but also it was probably the most popular teacher in the school, Mr. Gibson. But I also had a little bit of interest in drafting. But mainly it was because of my buddies and because of the teacher. So I got to the class and I really became pretty excited. And I remember getting into the first day of class. And if you've ever had a drafting class, or if you work in that field, you know that every draftman has a table. It's a white table, a draftsman table. And it's on this little angle so you can do your drawings and some of that. So I got to class, and here was this drafting table, and it had my name on it. As everybody else's name was on it the first day of class. It was my personal drafting table. And there, you know, some classes you had to pay fees for certain things, and so there was a compass there, and there was a protractor, and there was a drafting instrument set, all which we could take with us after, and the computer program CAD had just come out, so it was a big thing, and I was ready to start. And then Mr. Gibson said something that threw me off. He said to the whole class, and this was probably the second day, maybe third day, he said, before we start using these tools, and before you can work on that draftsman table, he said, you have to answer this question. What are your dreams for this class? And he said, before you can use any of this equipment, before you put anything on paper, you have to know and to share your dreams. And in all honesty, I hadn't thought about it a whole lot in my life at that time. But he said, that's what we're going to do for the next week. And so he made us get up from our personal drafting tables, and he made us move to this other part of the room, which had some couches in it and some chairs, and And there was a pop machine, and so, it was kind of this little lounge type of area. So he made us move away from all that, and we gathered in another part of the room for the next week, and each person shared their dreams. In all honesty, I can't even tell you what mine was. But I began to realize that there were people in my class that had seriously thought about their dreams. One of the folks, his name was Jim Wolfe. And I didn't really know Jim that well, although he was a classmate of mine. I knew him a little bit. We talked in the hall. But the one thing I did know about Jim Wolfe was his mother had cancer. And he was a senior, and I think her cancer was diagnosed when he was in elementary school, so it had been quite a period of time. And so Jim got up and he said his dream was to build a stand-alone cancer center that focused solely on cancer. And years ago there weren't any of those around. And now, they're everywhere. A place where they focus specifically on cancer. And then in the next few weeks in class, he created that standalone cancer center on paper because that was his dream. Well, before you were born, God put his dream into you and to me. Before he created our DNA, and before he created the size of our hearts and our smiles and the color of our eyes, God set us apart, starting with his dream of us.
How you guys?
He first imagined us in his mind with the great thought of love. That was the source of his dream for you and for me. And so he began to chart out the details of our DNA in preparation for the time when he would form us in our mother's womb in order to be born to achieve his purpose. And what a wonderful thought that is, to know that the God of the universe knew us so well and set us apart for his purpose even before we were born. So I don't know what you bring with you today, but if you're struggling with who you are or your value in this world, remember God dreamed you. And God always had and still has a plan for your life. He sees you as extremely valuable. And he created you with a purpose and a plan to help you get to that expected purpose for God. I learned a new word in Africa. And it's a Swahili word. And you can see that if anybody wants to attempt to pronounce it. I think it's pronounced Yusiwi Machoj. And in Africa, in Swahili, it's interesting. They put the weirdest letters together, like M and J, or they put J and W is at the end here, but it's Yusiwi Machoj. And it comes from the story found in the 14th chapter of Exodus. When God's people, after 450 years, they finally escaped from Egypt, and they were in the desert, and they were standing on the banks of the Red Sea, and they panicked. Because they looked behind them, and there was Pharaoh's army who was coming. And the Pharaoh's son had just been killed by the angel that passed over the Israelites. So they panicked. And so they looked to the back, and there was the Pharaoh's army coming. And they looked to the right and the left, and it was this desperate desert. And they looked before them, and there was the Red Sea. And they cried out to Moses, "You brought us out here to die. And then God stepped in. And God said to them, go forward. You see, we matujod. Go forward. Do not fear. Stand firm and watch what I will do for you. But go forward. And I'm not sure where you're at in your calling in life, or what God's plan is for you right now. But I encourage you to go forward. And maybe it's speaking a simple word to someone who you're fearful of their reaction. And maybe it's a word of hope, or maybe it's a word of vision, maybe it's a word of warning, as Jeremiah gave to the people. Or maybe part of God's vision for you now is to reach out to someone in need. And God's placed that person or that group right before you. And you've been kind of holding off on it. Or maybe it's getting involved somewhere that's totally out of your realm. You see, we matujod. For God has set you apart for this. And we have been set apart because of Jesus. In the 10th chapter of Hebrews, it says, by this will of God, we have been sanctified or set apart through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. And what that means is that Jesus has been the ultimate one set apart. As he suffered and he died on a cross and he rose from the dead to give us life and to give us eternal life. And by his actions, we're called to follow in his ways of being set apart as he was. May you have the courage to go forward.